The Employment Department published the latest job vacancy survey results last week. Oregon's private employers had 103,000 job openings at any given time between October and December of 2021. Oregon closed out the year just slightly below the all-time record high for job openings. In both Oregon and the US, there are now more job openings than there are unemployed people, with about 7 unemployed workers for every 10 job openings that are out there. That means the incredibly competitive hiring dynamic that we've been talking about for much of the past year is still going on. We can see that in a lot of different ways. One of them is in the average starting wages for job openings, which rose to $21 per hour in the fall. That's a 14% increase from 1 year before, and that's after adjusting for inflation, which has been running high in recent months. Even with those wage gains, employers still reported a lot of difficulty filling job vacancies. 3 out of 4 jobs were identified as hard to fill between October and December. Oregon's healthcare sector continues to have both the largest number of job openings and the largest number that are difficult to fill. And that's not a new trend since the pandemic started. Oregon's healthcare sector has consistently had the largest need for workers since at least 2013 when we started the Oregon Job Vacancy Survey. What the pandemic has done is really revealed and intensified labor shortages that the industry was already experiencing. Tomorrow, the Employment Department will release the unemployment rate and the jobs numbers for December. That will give us a snapshot of how job gains were looking right before the Omicron wave of COVID-19. Because of the timing of the data collection for the December report, it wrapped up about a week and a half before we saw COVID cases start to surge again at the end of the month. Any potential employment impacts of the Omicron wave could show up in the next jobs report, which will be released on March 8th. I do have a couple of other data points to consider also prior to the Omicron wave of the pandemic in Oregon. The first, from the US Census Bureau's Household Pulse Survey, is that between December 1st and December 13th, about 46,000 adults in Oregon said their primary reason for not working was because they were either afraid of getting or spreading COVID-19. Another 34,000 adults in Oregon said their primary reason for not working was either because they had COVID-19 or were caring for somebody that had either COVID or COVID symptoms. The Omicron wave of COVID-19 is unlikely to improve these numbers. Leading up to the pandemic, we also know that about 1 out of every 6 workers in Oregon's labor force lived in a household where all of the adults worked and where they worked in a job that by definition couldn't be done remotely, and they also had children present in the home. If any of these households are experiencing inconsistent or unavailable childcare or changes in school instruction as it potentially goes remote for some period of time, they may be also seeing job impacts, their ability to show up at a job at some points during the Omicron wave too. With that, I'll turn it over to David Gerstenfeld for more updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I have just a couple of brief comments to make. First, as you're aware, and as Gail was talking about, the Omicron variant is spreading through Oregon and across our country very quickly, and it's impacting businesses, workers, and their families. Wanted to highlight one tool that we have, the WorkShare program, that can help lessen the impact of the variant on some businesses and workers. This program helps prevent layoffs and is ideal for some businesses in situations like this. During the height of the pandemic, we saw more than 1,700 Oregon businesses participate in the WorkShare program. While that had declined, recently we've begun seeing an uptick in the use of WorkShare, seeing about a 13% increase in WorkShare usage since Thanksgiving. With the WorkShare program, when employees' hours are reduced by 20 to 40% in a week, they can receive 20 to 40% of their regular unemployment insurance benefit amount to help offset their reduced wages that were caused by them working fewer hours that week. We have a lot more information about the WorkShare program that can be found at OregonWorkShare.com. Also wanted to let people know that we'll be sending out close to 400,000 1099-G tax forms to people who received unemployment insurance benefits during the 2021 calendar year. The 1099-G form is used when people file their federal or state income taxes with the Internal Revenue Service and the Oregon Department of Revenue. All of the 1099-G forms will be in the mail by Monday, January 31st, so people can expect to receive them the first week of February, depending on mail delivery times in their area. We will also include the form in the online claim system in early February under the 1099-G tax forms tab towards the bottom of the page, so people can directly access it or print their own copy if they need another one. If somebody receives a 1099-G form and did not receive benefits in 2021, this could mean that somebody is trying to steal their identity. We encourage people in this situation to call our fraud hotline. It's 1-877-668-3204, or to complete our online ID theft form so that we can review the claim for possible fraud. We have more information about 1099-G forms at unemployment.oregon.gov. And we also have fraud-related resources that people can access by scrolling down the quick links on the left-hand navigation bar of that page to ID theft and clicking on the link to our ID theft page that has information and resources for people who may be victims of ID theft. Thank you. And with that, Gail and I are happy to try to answer your questions.
Great. We will call on you in the order you RSVP'd. So please to make sure you state to whom you are directing your question. As a reminder, if you are joining us by phone, be sure to hit *6 to unmute yourself. And if you don't get your question answered today, we can always help you get it answered at a different time by emailing oed_communications@oregon.gov. And up first is Peter Wong with Pamplin Media.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can, Peter. You're a little bit faint, though.
All right. I'm having a problem with it. This is primarily for Gail, although David might chip in. On your report saying that 103,000 jobs were considered hard to fill or whatever in the fourth quarter of 2021. I'm probably asking more speculation here. Is it because Oregon lacks the qualified workers to fill those jobs, or is it a case of not being able to match people, or people being reluctant to enter for those jobs for COVID or whatever other reasons?
So to your question, Peter, and it's a good one. There were 103,000 job openings with private employers at any given time between October and December. About 3 out of 4 of those were difficult to fill. And the difficulties are widespread. We let employers just give us open-ended responses. We say, if this is hard to fill, why? And then we kind of categorize it into common themes. And not surprisingly, at least to me, the most common theme right now is just a lack of workers, a lack of applicants, which means there either were too few or no applicants for the jobs that employers were offering. And what I see that as is there are some, what you're talking about is skills or structural mismatches, either the jobs open in Baker City, but the workers in Klamath Falls, that could be one structural mismatch, or, the jobs open in Baker City, and that's not something that any people who are actively seeking have the skill set for in that same labor shed, right? So that does happen. And I think we see that become a greater issue for some employers, particularly as unemployment gets lower. What I think is actually happening right now with the lack of applicants being the biggest reason for difficulty filling job vacancies, it's just that we are seeing this extraordinary level of hiring, and it's happening in Oregon and the US. There's just simply not enough available workers for this record or near record level of job openings that employers are trying to fill. Just as a contextual reference, prior to these last 2 quarters that we've done, the highest number of job openings we'd ever seen was 67,000 in the summer of 2017. So we're not just a little bit above where we were before. This is head and shoulders we're above where we've been before. And so I think that is really the biggest challenge, is that there's this huge amount of hiring that they're trying to do. And, you know, there is not a large excess of available labor right now. The number of unemployed people in November was only about 17,000 above what it was before the pandemic. So while that's more, that's not, you know, as many as the number of jobs that, you know, we were about 60,000 jobs below our pre-pandemic level as of November. So there's still a gap there. And, you know, you think about employers are even trying to get beyond where we were prior to the pandemic. So I think it's just really that sheer volume that is the biggest barrier right now. It's just, there's a lot of demand, a lot of people trying to buy stuff, and a lot of people trying to hire people to, you know, make those goods and provide those services.
And the only thing that I would add, I think, you know, Gail outlined excellently what some of the big drivers are. There's not any one thing that can magically be done to help all the workers find jobs and all the employers find all the workers that they need. One of the things that the employment department does in conjunction with our partners in the work source centers is we really do look for opportunities for people that are able to work, but maybe there is a mismatch between their particular skills and the skills that some of the employers in their area are looking for. And we can help look for opportunities to find training, ways for people to skill up to find the jobs that are in demand in their area. And frequently, it's also a lot of talking to people to help them understand, with their education, work history, whatever their background is, what some pathways are to get into those high demand jobs. Sometimes people may not recognize that they have really transferable skills, and we can help them fill in a minor gap so that they are able to move into some of those high demand occupations. So that's a lot of the work that is going on right now in the work source centers.
All right, I have one follow-up question, and I noticed in that same report you list healthcare, construction, and manufacturing as 3 of the 5 sectors that each have 10,000 or more positions available. It so happens that healthcare, construction, and manufacturing are targets in the Future Ready plan that the legislative committee heard last week from the governor's office, and that is scheduled for consideration by the forthcoming legislative session. Is this more of an attempt to deal with the future, or how might this affect the present? Or are we seeing, actually, as Gail, you mentioned earlier, healthcare has been a problem sector since before the pandemic, so that part isn't new. And anyway.
Hi, Peter. So you're cutting in really a lot, and I think
Future Ready targets healthcare, construction, and manufacturing jobs, 3 of the 5 sectors that in your report have at least 10,000 or more positions available as of the report.
yes.
Future Ready targets those 3 sectors.
Yes, so I didn't catch all the questions, so clarify if I miss a part here. I think what you're asking is so we do see that those 3 large sectors, construction, manufacturing, and healthcare, are the areas that are being highlighted in the proposed Future Ready Oregon package. They are large industries in Oregon that are each having different sets of difficulties filling workers right now. Construction is actually, as of November, at its all-time high of employment. And so the difficulty there is similar to what they saw beforehand, in that it's really hard to find workers, and it's been difficult to find workers in construction, specifically because they're slightly more likely to require previous experience. And that makes sense in some cases, right? You know, you're operating heavy equipment and things like that. That might be something that you need a little bit of experience with for construction. So that's something that is, and I think there's no shortage of stories or anecdotes or context about specifically housing and other things that we need construction to build. So I think that that's something that you know, we're seeing in the job vacancy survey, and I think also is a part of that Future Ready package, because you know, I think there is some need for future workforce growth there. They're really in a tight spot. In terms of manufacturing, manufacturing tends to be one of those places where we see a lot of replacement openings into the future. So manufacturing has about 205,000 projected job openings between 2020 and 2030. Not just job openings like turnover. These are job openings that are going to require newly trained workers to replace those who are retiring or otherwise leaving the labor force or making major occupational changes. And then in healthcare, again, I think you mentioned this, and I've also, kind of talked about it in the comments as well, is that there has been tremendous hiring need for workers in healthcare for a long time. Pandemic period aside, prior to this, for at least a few decades and into the future, it has been a large and consistently growing sector, and the demographics of the state really show that we're more likely to need more healthcare in the future. And so that's something that is a long running trend. And the other thing about healthcare is that about half of all healthcare job vacancies require some kind of education or credential beyond high school, compared to about 30% for all job openings. So I think that is something that matters too in terms of the Future Ready package, because they're trying to do that training and credentialing.
And I think you're right, Peter, that I mentioned in my prior comment about the work that our workforce centers do, the employment department employees and our partners there. And Future Ready really is focused on helping all of those partners really take advantage of, for all the challenges that we're seeing, that there are some opportunities to really address some large statewide systemic issues. Oregon and nationally, we see over and over again when there's a recession that during the economic recovery, that communities of color and some other communities just get left behind. They don't benefit at the same rate. And we see a real opportunity where we have this recovery that is starting, and at the same time, this huge demand for workers to really help people that have been facing more obstacles in the past, to really focus and help get them into these jobs, and frequently really good long time career options to help them. So it's really trying to take advantage of the need on the employer side for talented workers, and the need for a number of communities to get the kind of assistance that they don't always get, so that they can share in the economic recovery.
Thank you. You did answer the question, and I'm going to have to pursue the problem of my audio here. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Up next is Bill Poehler with the Statesman Journal.
Yeah, hey, this question is for David. I'm if curious, you can walk me through what's supposed to happen when a person has a claim that involves multiple states. What can you tell me about what's supposed to happen there, and then what happens in those instances?
There's a lot of different variables that can go on there. So I can give you some general responses. Each unemployment insurance program is a state-specific program. There's some common requirements, and we've talked a lot about some of those federal guardrails and requirements that states have to comply with. There's agreements between all of the states where essentially if somebody files a claim in one state, for instance, if somebody files a claim in Oregon, we know what their wages are in Oregon because that gets reported to us. They may also have worked in Washington or Massachusetts or any other state, and those earnings may help them qualify for benefits or increase the benefit amount that they can get in Oregon. So we coordinate with the other state unemployment agencies to find out how much they earned, and to make sure that the person is getting benefits in one state, but not more than one state. It gets into some very technical parts of the law where someone may have performed work in multiple states. Sometimes the law is pretty clear about where they need to file for benefits. Sometimes the worker actually has the option of where to file benefits, in which case we help them understand, for instance, if you file your claim in Oregon, here's what your benefit amount would be. If you file in California, here's their estimate of how much your benefits would be, and the person can choose where to pursue the claim. There are sometimes complexities, as you can probably tell from that answer, that requires some of our specialists to talk directly to the specialists in the other state to make sure that that is being coordinated. And early on in the pandemic, we talked about some of the more complex claims that almost always take longer than the typical claim. And these certainly fall into that category because of the need to coordinate with another state.
Okay. So that kind of makes sense. So tell me about what happens, like if there's a, let's say if there's a dispute between the states, like I've heard this a couple times of, especially people working in or living in Southwest Washington, or who live in Portland, work in Southwest Washington, one way or the other. How does that communication happen between Oregon and the other state, and how and is Oregon kind of behind the ball in that because of the computer system? Tell me about that.
Sure. So each state has a designated person who is the contact person for all the other states. And Oregon actually has a very well-respected interstate program coordination. We've had a series of people who have been in that role who are really excellent at that job. Well, our technology certainly can make things more challenging sometimes. It doesn't impact this part of the process. Part of the way that the states do this coordination is through, they're required to do it through a federal computer network. And that federal network also is pretty antiquated technology that the federal government is looking at modernizing. So again, kind of harkening back to the early days of the pandemic, when there were some systems that just weren't working, Oregon's technology was able to keep functioning. We were not able to do everything that we normally do for interstate claims early in the pandemic because that federal system was overwhelmed for a period of time, which meant that the state computer systems could not talk to each other. And it was dependent on kind of individual phone calls from one person in one state to the designated person in the other state. That was fixed relatively rapidly, and that hasn't been a challenge since then. So those are more complex claims, but that isn't something that our technology currently really creates challenges with.
Okay, thanks for that, David. Appreciate it.
Okay, next is Kate Davidson with OPB.
Hi, this is a question for David. I heard that the head of the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association said he had spoken to you about options for temporary wage replacement during this surge, when people have been exposed to the virus and have to quarantine. Are there options that are being actively considered beyond the work share that you described?
So in terms of the programs that the Employment Department administers, we have the work share program. We also did make some changes to our eligibility rules that we had public rulemaking hearings on very recently that can help some people in this situation. It can't help everyone. So at the start of the pandemic, what we saw, unemployment insurance is really there to help people who are able to be at work. We're seeing a lot of people right now who are not able to work because they have been exposed to COVID-19. There were a series of federal and state kind of temporary programs that were put into place that provided either additional paid or unpaid leave under various programs, some that were administered at the federal level, some at the state level, although the Employment Department did not administer any of them. All of those have expired at this point. And that's something that we cannot just create a new benefit program. That's something that would take some sort of legislative action at either the federal or the state level.
So just to make sure I understand that, is that sort of optimistic thinking at this point from Orla's? I don't want to, I'm not trying to characterize their stance, but is there anything else that's being actively considered in terms of wage replacement?
So I don't know what was shared. I did have some communication with Orla about this, and I know that they raised that concern with us as well. We kind of shared what we can do and what we can't do. In terms of federal legislation, I'm not optimistic that we'll see something. If there was to be some federal legislation, in terms of helping people that are feeling the impact of the Omicron spread now, I don't think the legislation would come out rapidly enough to help. And of course, that would be a new program that would then have to be created and implemented. At the state level, again, it would take legislative action. The legislature will start meeting in February. Hopefully the Omicron spike has started to ease by then. I really don't know what the chances are of some additional program being created when the legislature meets in February, though.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
Sure.
Okay, next is Mike Rogoway with Oregonian.
Hi, David. Hi, Gail. I have a question. It's probably directed at David. We wrote a story this week that's different from stories that we've written recently. It was about a large layoff, and we've had very few of those. After we wrote the story, I had inquiries from a number of other employers desperate to find the workers who were getting laid off so they could hire them. You'd mentioned WorkSource earlier. I'm curious if you're doing anything different. We aren't having a lot of layoffs, but I'm wondering if you're doing anything differently about when people do lose their jobs in a layoff, about matching them up with employers who are looking to hire.
That's a great question, Mike. That kind of job matching is a key part of what the employment department does in the WorkSource centers. How we're providing that work certainly is a little bit different in the pandemic just because of the providing virtual services. Some of the key things that we do is we are having people pretty quickly after they file their initial claim, they have a one-on-one meeting with someone from the WorkSource Center who looks at their skills, their experience, their background, and talks to them about what jobs are available in their area to make sure that they know. And that is a great opportunity, and we do a lot of job referrals through that process. It's also an opportunity where we make sure that people are actually looking for work, but certainly that's an opportunity where there is a large layoff, particularly those local centers. The people that see those workers coming in frequently know what other employers in the area have been looking to hire, even besides the electronic job postings and other tools. So they're able to quickly point people in the right direction to find those jobs.
Is there any work that's being done with the employer doing the laying off, to I don't know, to communicate more directly with or quicker with workers, or does it always go through, worker individual contact?
There are some other processes, and I'm going to talk in generalities because I can't talk about individual employers because of the confidentiality. If it's a large enough layoff, sometimes some of the federal laws, the WARN Act, come into play. And in those situations, the employment department and a number of our other partners from the workforce system go in what we call a rapid response. And we go in to share information about how to get unemployment benefits for people that might be eligible, and also talk about what job openings are there, help people get registered to look for jobs. For people that are seeking retraining, we can talk about the other programs and opportunities that are available. So that's a kind of formalized process. We also have done something very similar when an employer notifies us that they're going to have a large layoff. We have offered that same type of assistance where we can either physically or virtually have someone present to help give information to the workers that may be laid off about applying for benefits and about registering in our job match system and iMatch skills, and really make it easier for them to find that new replacement job.
Good. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Mike. Next is Allison Mechanic with KATU.
There. My question is for Gail, and I apologize if this is a little elementary, but it's just a question we've been getting a lot from our viewers. If we have so many job openings, why is our unemployment rate still higher than it was pre-pandemic? Is it just because we don't have qualified workers to fill those open spots?
It's a great question. I think that there are several aspects to why the unemployment rate now isn't, at the record low yet that it was before. I think, so first of all, the set of people who are unemployed is not fixed in time. It's different from one time to another. And so we're not just talking about one cohort of people, we're talking about a revolving, moving, living set of people that is different every time. And so that's one aspect that I think is important to consider about the available workforce. In terms of other things, there could be some, again, like we talked about earlier when Peter was asking, some mismatches that are happening, graphical mismatches between where people are that want jobs and where people are that are offering jobs that align with their skill sets and their interests. I think that there are also some workers, like you said, who are, so just to be perfectly clear, whether or not you're receiving unemployment insurance benefits has no bearing on whether or not you are defined as unemployed. And in really tough economic times, the vast majority of people who are unemployed are getting benefits, but in times when the unemployment rate is lower, like it is now, sometimes less than half of people who are unemployed are actually getting benefits. So just make sure that that's not something I think is not a factor. There may be people who are actively seeking, but they're looking for something that is different. Maybe they're looking for something that is remote when before they had an in-person job. And so they're looking, but maybe they're not looking with the sense of urgency that employers have in hiring, right? And we see that a lot actually in the Indeed hiring survey. It's a national survey, but I don't have reason to believe that Oregon is significantly different than in other states, where they say for people who are unemployed workers, what share of them are urgently seeking work? And the last time I looked, I think it was 1 out of 3, which means 2 out of 3 weren't necessarily. They were like, maybe in a few months. And they're like, why? Why the wait? And so it said, well, I've got a spouse that's working. I have care responsibilities that I need to think about. Or we have a financial cushion. And, let's go to remember whether or not somebody was ever employed. There were 3 rounds of federal stimulus that went to almost every household in the United States. And there was, we're also seeing, like I mentioned earlier, these big wage gains where the earnings coming into a house are bigger. And all of those things might mean that there are people who are unemployed, but maybe they're unemployed, but not right now wanting to seek. So there's still several points that could be friction. One thing I want to talk about is that we talk about like, where are these pieces that are missing, or where are these spots where we're still not exactly where we were before. But I think it's important to note how far we've come. Oregon employers added 100,000 jobs between January and November. That is a tremendous amount of hiring. That's an incredible rebound. That is faster by years than what we've seen in the prior recession. It took us 7 years to recover from the Great Recession, and we're on stride to do it in less than 3 from this one. So there's a tremendous amount happening, and I know there's still some sticking points, but I don't want to overlook all of the progress that employers and workers have made in 2021.
Thank you. And I guess just to quickly follow up. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I cut somebody off? I'm sorry.
That's fine. Why don't you go ahead, Allison?
Sorry about that. I'm too excited. I guess my other question is just, have we ever seen this many job openings before, like to be in this kind of situation? This just seems unique compared to what we've been hearing.
It is unique. So we have seen this many. We saw 107,000 just with private employers. So that's not even counting schools, which we know have been trying to hire a lot. So between July and September of 2021, there were 107,000 job openings at any given time with private employers. But like I mentioned earlier, before that, the highest we'd seen was 67,000 in 2017. So this is quite a different situation. And again, I would call back to that stimulus that was there, where we saw that extra money coming into households. And for those who are unemployed, also enhanced unemployment benefits, and all of that raised the collective personal income. And that has really been fueling this increased demand for goods and for services. And that in turn is creating a situation where employers need to hire more workers to make those things and provide those services. And in addition to that, we're also seeing record numbers of people quitting their jobs. And the reason that that matters for job vacancies is when people quit their jobs, it creates another job opening behind them that an employer needs to fill. So that takes that level that was already there and ratchets it up another level. And as we see more people, about 1 in 4 workers in Oregon is ages 55 or older. And as we see more people move toward and enter retirement, we also see when people retire, often it leaves another job opening behind them. And also, they're not looking for their next job opportunity. But so all those things layer up the amount of job openings that employers have right now.
And Allison, I was just going to, in response to your first question, highlight something that Gail said in her introductory comments about that I think points to part of that mismatch between the number of people that are unemployed and the number of employers that are looking for workers. She gave some data. It's about 80,000 people as of mid-December, before the Omicron variant really hit, that were out of work, but were out of work either because of fear around getting COVID, or because they had COVID or caregiving responsibilities. So those may be people who temporarily can't work, or who are looking for work but have barriers to finding jobs. And I think that also during the pandemic has been a bigger factor than certainly in normal times, when we still see people that have childcare challenges to overcome, but they've been really exacerbated due to the pandemic.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Allison. Up next is Chris Lehman with KLCC. Hey,
Good
Chris.
afternoon. Hi. This question is for Gail. You mentioned a 14% increase in average starting wages, if I recall that correctly. Do you have that broken down? Is there a particular sector that has had an even higher or the highest increase in average wages year over year? And then as part of that, I think a related question would be, how has this affected the number of Oregonians who are currently earning minimum wage?
Those are both questions. So the first one, I don't, with the job vacancy survey itself, have a quarterly year-over-year comparison. It's a wonderful survey, but it takes a few quarters of data piled together to be able to make those kind of comparisons. What I can tell you from the monthly jobs report information that we get, again, the December version is coming out tomorrow, but as of the November version of that, where we've seen job gains that are still running out ahead of inflation, the sectors where we're seeing that are construction, leisure and hospitality, and other services. And other services includes like hair salons and other personal care services, auto repair, stuff like that. Now to the second part of the question, hold on, remind me once again so that I don't lose part of it.
Sure, if it's had an impact on the number of Oregonians earning minimum wage.
Wonderful. Thank you for reminding me of that. So the number of Oregonians earning minimum wage has been going up. Just for everybody's shared reference. The minimum wage has been going up on an accelerated schedule. It usually goes up by about 50 or 75 cents an hour every year on July 1st. That started, I believe, in 2016, and the last hike on that accelerated schedule ends on July 1st of 2022. And then after that, it's adjusted every July 1st for inflation. So the number of workers who are earning minimum wage, we do see that as that has increased over time, more workers, kind of get lifted up by that floor. But interestingly, both before the pandemic and after, the demand for workers in a low unemployment environment has been so tough for employers that they were already competing on wages before 2021. And we were seeing that the average starting wage, even in leisure and hospitality, which has the highest share of minimum wage jobs, the average starting wage was already above the minimum wage in every area of the state in 2019. I think the one exception is Clackamas County, but I will follow up on that and let you know for sure. But we'd seen in the years prior to the pandemic that the average starting wage was already running above those minimum wage increases. That said, there are still more workers who get lifted by that minimum wage every year. And I have a couple of reports on that we can share out afterwards, links.
Thank you.
Next is Katie STREIT with KOBI-TV.
Hi, so this is directed towards Gail and David, whoever can answer this. We've been talking a little bit about wages, and some have called this time the Great Resignation, and others have called it the Great Renegotiation. Are we seeing employees now have an upper hand? I don't want to say like against employers, but towards employers when it comes to their negotiation process and during their hiring process, and is that different than previous trends that we've seen in Oregon?
Yes, and yes, in short. And to be a bit more detailed, yes, for particularly in 2021 and into today, we've really seen that it's been a job seekers market where, like I mentioned, in a situation, where there's, 7 unemployed workers for every 10 job openings out there, you can apply to multiple jobs and get multiple offers and take the one that pays the most, or take the one that pays more, but maybe you don't like quite as well, and say, hey, would you match this? And so, yes, when we see that there is a great competition among employers for workers, that does create a situation where they can, bargain for more wages or more flexibility or bonuses or perks or, different things, or where employers will just offer those to try and get people in the door. And then also, One of the things that I like to flag in addition to this is that when we see that there is a time, like we're seeing, it was in September that Oregon hit a record number of quits, and it was November for the US, is that it also matters in terms of retention. And I think particularly in those in-person services and during the pandemic, there is definitely some room that workers have been saying, you know, we've been here to get through this pandemic. If the person next to me is getting hired at how much more, and I was here to get through this, then where's my, you know, what are you doing to help retain the workers to get them in the door so that they don't become your next quit? So I do think that that dynamic is greater now than it was, you know, a handful of years ago.
And then quick follow-up, will we see this bounce back into a more traditional employers having an upper hand, or kind of what we've seen pre-pandemic in our job market and job trends?
Yes, to some degree. So we talked about those numbers of people who said their primary reason for not working was because they were afraid of getting or spreading COVID, or because they have COVID. And, you know, for those workers, you know, we hope that that is, you know, a temporary interruption or a temporary barrier, the care responsibilities and things like that. And after those subside, after the pandemic's more fully under control, that creates an additional pool of workers that will be available to take jobs. So there is some, you know, short-term increase we can hope to see in the number of available workers as COVID becomes more fully under control for longer periods of time instead of just in between these waves. That said, we're in a 4% unemployment environment, and we know from before the pandemic, you know, that's a really difficult space for employers to be in. And so I do think that it's still going to be recruitment and retention efforts for them going forward, particularly as we come up against, again, those demographics I was talking about. 1 out of 4 workers in Oregon is at or near retirement age. And so as they're leaving and not looking for their next opportunity, that's, you know, creating more of a need for employers to find workers. And so the way we've typically done that is by importing our labor force. People move here from other states, other areas, and that's the biggest way we've grown our labor force pretty much every year since the mid-'80s. But we were seeing that slow down too. It was down by 20% in 2020. And 2020 wasn't the first year. It had gone down for a few years before that as well. And I think that speaks to other things that are going on, availability and affordability of housing, for example. And so the demographics and the in-migration, the lower net in-migration, makes it more difficult to find workers in the future. So I think it will get easier a little bit in the short term, but there's still these longer headwinds. And that's why I want to loop back to something that David Furstenfeld said a little bit ago. And it's something that the Office of Economic Analysis has done some great research on. And it's about engaging the latent labor force, is what they call it. And what it is really them looking at a series of questions like, what if women participated in the labor force at the same rate that men do? What if teens who at they're near their record low unemployment rate, it's about 10%, but still the US unemployment rate in December was 4% and teens are near a record low at 10%. What can we do to not only get them more into employment so they don't have a higher unemployment rate, but what if teens, for example, also participated in the labor force in the same rate that they did a few decades ago? And it answers these series of questions. And what they found was that if employers, if the workforce system, if other players can pull on those people who are having some sort of barrier to getting a job, there could be as many as 300,000 additional available workers in Oregon by, I think it's 2031. So there are some possible, you know, solutions or opportunities in that, but there's still some real headwinds even after the short-term COVID things clear up.